Blessings, everyone. This is Peter Fay, and welcome to Into the Mythica, the journey into the subtle earth, into the layer of our stories and the magic that sits beneath the surface of the world. I am broadcasting this from the beautiful mountainscape land in Jamul, just east of San Diego, where I was led on the quest through a series of synchronicities which showed me the path, and where I'm witnessing myself stepping into a more consistent rhythm of presenting from the quest. And this is interesting because it's like, when I first envisioned Into the Mythica, when I first cast the spell of Into the Mythica, it was to make sense out of the overwhelm of my senses and somehow discover the pattern beneath the surface of my story that caused me to arrive at the various synchronicities in my life and showed me and led me to what I came to call the real magical world. It was a quest in service to the goddesses of story, song, and dance, the muses, Calliope, Euterpe, and Terpsichore, which led me through a very real world of magicians, queens, kings, and various other characters inside of a larger world of shared synchronicities that proved to be the very essence of what we call the magical world. It was a world of shamanism. It was a world of Jedi, real life Jedi, beings who had modeled themselves on the myths and legends and true stories of the Jedi, Djedi, in Egypt, and the Pillar of Consciousness, to avatars of the Magdalene, to Grail kings and queens and reborn Rosicrucian assassins, all occurring in this vast landscape of synchronicity, and where my devotion to the muses and in whole to story herself, to Saga, the goddess of story, proved to lead me through a series of circumstances that showed me, wow, there's a real world there, and we're all moving through it. And this led me into wondering, well, what is that world and how does it relate? How do I give that to the people? It's one thing for me to say, I went to school for the mystic arts. A lot of people that, I'll turn to be like, does that exist? I thought that was just a thing in Harry Potter. And I was like, wow, is this my brand? Because in another sense, I was pre-med. I was into cognitive psychobiology. I found the Western paradigm of medicine to be not adequate to what I was perceiving. Because remember, I got on the quest to share my understand my perceptions. And this was way before, the term neurodivergent, or what I prefer, neuroemergent consciousness ever became a thing. And where I gradually saw that the world was changing, that the models for medicine, the models for psychology, the models for what it meant to be human in the process of becoming something else were in a state of evolution. And as time progressed and I stayed upon the quest and I kept documenting my journey into the Mythica, I started noticing all these health and wholeness patterns coming up, trauma resolution, internal family systems, entheogenic work, psilocybin, ayahuasca, MDMA, combo, so all these things. And where the consciousness individuals were waking up from a more cookie cutter sense of personality into who their unique and treasured expression really was. I saw a noble movement towards individuality. And individuality held within a larger collective understanding. An understanding that brought all of us together inside the grove of life, where I came to see through the documenting of my story that there was no separation between ourselves and the land, that every person in any culture Any race, color, creed, age, whatever, all of those things are more impermanent than the quest itself, the landscape of the quest. The answer to the question, why did I arrive at this landscape with the dope background and authentic thing? What did I do over the 20 years of the quest to create the Into the Mythica publishing platform at addintothemythica.com? What were the circumstances that led me to discover the modern hero's journey, to realize that there was no separation between ourselves and the planet, to recognize the characters of the great story that were carrying the seeds to the new earth, and my sacred function as a storyteller of that emergent and luminous horizon. It's a beautiful thing because, you know, on our quest, we're always negotiating the idea of fate, that which is just going to happen, and fortune or freedom, that which maybe we can influence, and trying to figure out what that is. And it's something that really came to me because, you know, when I came back from the quest, I'd come back from like a world of Fae and Elvish and Galactic and all of these kinds of beings, like human beings, but of a certain hue, H-U-E, a certain color, a certain texture that defined the tradition and the world and the way they worked their magic, and how those things fit together inside of that larger world. And when I came back to Menlo Park, first to Tahoe, then to Menlo Park. And for those of you who have never been to Menlo Park, it's in Palo Alto, which is where Facebook, Meta, which is where Meta is, which is where Adobe is, which is where Google is where Apple is, like relatively. So you're like in the heart of the thing itself. And while I was there, I started looking at the marketplace. And I was doing this from the perspective of a mystical storyteller who had come back from like an authentic, real mystical quest, and now I'm in the thick of like capitalism, like agency-based culture, and like this marketplace of optimization that was not really about what is spirit telling you. It wasn't really about, you know, are you listening to the land? It wasn't really about what is the resonance between yourself and your circumstances. Is there a divination? Is there a deeper thing that wants to be heard through the feminine channel? And where I saw a lot of very like optimize. What's your progress? What's your product? What's your app? And where I wondered, you know, why am I there? You know, why did the quest lead me there? And it was interesting because, you know, where I had ended up, and this was with Cassandra Banks, who's a fabulous divinator and who I studied magic at the academy with. We lived across the street from the library on a street called Ravenswood. And it was a beautifully well-stocked library where we would go, and right outside the library, there were a pair of, I think they were redwood trees. They were like solid trees, and an owl carved of wood sitting on like a pedestal of wood that you could sit on. And I looked at this with love, because when I went on the heroic journey, you know, when we say, well, we go off, we endure the trials to bring something back to the tribe. And that's what I'm like bringing back right now, where I really came to the realization that there was no separation. The gift that came to me was the recognition that we and the land were one, that what we experienced as ourself and its story was a part of the larger tree of the world. And that all of the various, you know, brands that we look at that try to show like a tree or a human being in a tree, like all of those things, they were all derived from this fundamental forgotten thing that we have never been separate from the garden. It is just our function to be stewards and our evolution towards that recognition. And when I was there, and I'm there in this space, and I've come from living in the mountains. I've come from like living in, you know, in my Carnia, the magical parking lot of Narnia when one lives in their car with my wolf, to living in, like, the temples and mansions, to having nothing, to having everything, and where I'd come to see that wherever I arrived had a certain mythopoetic quality to it that was a direct correspondence to what was being said to me about myself and about my story at that moment. And it was very much in the idea that there is something that wants to come through you. And as I'm here on this land and I'm feeling that, and I'm starting the regular process of publishing, there is the sense that when I came back to Menlo Park and I was there across the street from the library with the wood in a place like defined by AI and agents, the idea of agency and a marketplace of, that type of commerce, that I was in the digital tree. Stanford's mascot is a tree, right? And I'm looking at things on the level of, why is that idea prevalent in that space? What are the vibrations of that space? And I saw that I was in the realm of the digital tree, the digital version of the tree that the earth plane herself is the actual version of, and that I was gaining the understanding of the media and the world of production that I had not gained on the quest. And as alien as it was to me, and it was, right, it served a great purpose because it helped me develop the understandings for like the Mythica app and to build out the website more and to understand social media. And then I wondered why I was there, and I started to realize why I was there. And then the path changed. And when the path changed, it brought me here to this landscape, to the actual tree, to the actual land, to a place with like the expansion of the sky, to a place at a weave of ley lines that really empowers myself and everyone else here, where now I'm being informed into something else. Now I'm being informed to share the story. And where each action, publishing this, which might be common for some of you, but is super new for me, even though I've published a couple things here and there, I never really got into the rhythm of it, where the land is calling me to share the story, saying, you have come back from the quest, you were supported in your return, you learned the nature of what drives culture in that way, and now you've been brought to this landscape to share the light and the media of the new world with the people. So, thank you for listening. Come check out the website at intothemythica.com. We'll be adding more and more content all the time, and may you live your myth.